fundamentally, leadership is super, super important, obviously. But the leader of the leaders, that person really does have an extraordinary impact on whether something's going to be successful.
Hey everyone, welcome to LED, Leadership with Ed, a 301 level leadership program and podcast for more senior leaders and business owners that I'm just trying to help educate and grow their leadership skills as well as my own, as I've been on this leadership journey for 30 plus years on the way here. And I want to thank everyone that's been listening to LED. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, and as always, make sure you comment, like, and share as we continue to grow a very large national following, which is fun. And you can catch our show live every other Wednesday morning. It drops bright and early on that side. And today we have one of my favorites, Mark Abbott. He's I just found this on your LinkedIn, Mark, and I'm going to try to do my best to do this. As founder, CEO, and coach with decades of experience across startups, early stage, small and mid-sized companies. But the bigger part in how we met is you're the visionary and founder of 90. It could also be known as 90.io. And that is really goes with the great EOS system. This book's on my desk, Rocket Fuel, Traction. Most people have read Gino's books on EOS, but you're the operating system that makes EOS work. And Gina on our team, our CEO, said that we've been using it. We went to EOS 4 years ago, and so we've been on 90 4 years ago. So thank you for that. But it was cool. Mark, it said track record includes generating over 1 billion in gains for colleagues and investors. But really you have this dual passion for helping leaders to build better leadership teams and companies. And then I love that you ended with, and building every one of the core cloud-based tools needed to make the associated journey a hell of a lot easier than it otherwise would be. And we have found that to be true with EOS and then all the great tools in a 90 that we utilize. So welcome, Mark. Glad to have you on the show.
Hey, delighted to be here, and thanks for being a customer.
We have, and very proud one. We'll talk a little bit about some of the new things you're developing and the comments Gina's been providing, because Gina's hard to impress, but she's been very, very impressed with what you guys have built and all the new tools now. Yeah. It's interesting. You've been doing this for 4 decades now of just working with small and medium-sized businesses. And is there a pattern you see on the ones that, thrive versus the one that, really just kind of slowly broke apart?
Yeah, I think as goes, what EOS would say, as goes the leadership team, so goes the whole company. I think it's even simpler than that, candidly, as goes whomever's running the thing, right? That has a huge impact, right? The businesses will rise to the level of whether it's the founder or and or CEO or the subsequent CEO. That individual, you cannot do better than they can do. So, really fundamentally, leadership is super, super important, obviously. But the leader of the leaders, that person really does have an extraordinary impact on whether something's going to be successful or whether it's going to grind, or obviously whether it's going to, head in the opposite direction. And what's fascinating is that individual's growth is going to be impacted by the growth of the people that they have reporting to them. So if a founder, as an example, is surrounded by sort of a bunch of inexperienced people, that the weight of carrying them is literally going to impede that founder's personal progress. So there's a really interesting dynamic that goes on there. But fundamentally, the leader of the leaders is extraordinarily important.
That's interesting. The leader of the leaders. Can you tell real quickly that the leader of the leaders is not real strong or strong? I mean, you deal with so many companies and so many businesses are using your software and you're being sought after to speak and talk about this. Is it readily apparent where you're like, right in that first discussion, you're like, yeah, this isn't good?
Yeah. So I am if you look at personalities and you look at one of the tools is Jung-Myers or Myers-Briggs is well known, right?
Yep.
I'm an INTJ, and so what that means is I tend to think internally as opposed to think out loud. Number one. Number two, I'm very intuitive, so I like to sort of I sense things, right? So one of the things that I've said that's kind of a little bit weird, and I've basically been saying this for decades now. When I was investing in companies, I would say I could walk into a company, especially in the old days, right, where everybody was working in the same offices.
Yep.
I could walk into a company and immediately start to feel the energy within the organization, right? By the time I got to the reception desk, you could start to feel things. And then what I would say is I just needed to do a couple of things. I could walk around and get a deeper sense for things and start to connect some dots. And then what I would want to do is I'd want to sit down with the leader of leaders, right? Let's call it either the founder and or CEO. And I'd ask them about their leadership team. And I'd use a very simple heuristic, which is, I believe that you can simplify thinking about leaders and people within your organization through a simple thing called ABCD players, right? So A players make the organization better. They do their job. They bring energy. They help you see things that their seat doesn't even require. All right. So they fundamentally make the company better. B players are fundamentally good at doing their job. So they keep the trains running and they do what they're asked to do. C players drain energy, and D players, it's like, how did we ever even think this seat, right? And I asked them to tell me about their leadership team using my simple ABCD player heuristic. Well, if they're surrounded by B and C players, I'm out of there, right? If they fundamentally don't try to surround themselves with people who can make the organization better, and they sort of tolerate mediocrity, I don't have any. I'm like out of there now. Let's say that conversation is a collection of A's and B's, and maybe they've had some C's, but they've gotten rid of them. The next thing I want to do is I want to go sit in a meeting with them and their other leaders and just see the organizational dynamic, see the team dynamic. And a classic example is you walk into a large conference room that can sit 12 people, and you've got 5 people, and the 5 people all sit on different ends of the table. It's like, oh, right?
Not good. Yep.
And just watch a meeting, right? See what the chemistry's like. So, literally within an hour, if I wanted to go that fast, I can figure out whether or not this is worth spending time on.
That's interesting. And we've been fortunate that you've been to Des Moines, been to our office, been to some of our events and seen some of our leaders. And I do get asked, why has McGill-Jungie been able to grow so fast and then have a national presence, even though we're based in Des Moines? And as you're describing leadership teams, I am fortunate to say, there's 5 of us, but all 5 are A-type players. And, your team's really enjoyed working with Gina, who's our implementer and our CEO. And then, Ross, where you just kind of look around that, and Scott and Trent, our next gen leaders. And I think it's because I haven't had to carry that burden. Ross and I came together 13 years. And when you're describing that burden, some of my peers have built their firms on their backs. It's a bigger personality, and it just weighs on them on that. So that resonated and hit home, that I've been able to build with versus solo, what we've been doing here. So that was a great comment.
Yeah, and I think the other thing I'd add is I shared my perspective as an investor or prospective investor. Yep. Now let me share my perspective as a founder and a CEO, right? And that is that I love, we have a book that we published recently called Meetings Kind of Suck, right? And and the reality is I love meeting with my team, right? And just, 90% of the time, we it's funny. I took over running the meetings. I won't share why, but probably 4 weeks ago, and we rate our meetings on a scale of 1 to 10, our weekly meeting, and
Yep.
my goal is to consistently get it to 10. My goal is to consistently hit the objectives that we all agreed to, which includes we rate our issues on a scale of 1 to 5, and 5 is we got to get this thing done before we walk out of the room, and 4 is I'd like to get this done, but it's not as important as a 5. And then 3 is if we have time, kind of a thing, right? So those are the first 5, 4, 3. My perspective is, we got to get every single 5 done. We have to be able to get it done in a manner where there's air in the room for people to talk, right? It's not just push, and you're going so fast that people don't have a chance to really participate. And then I want to get 85% of my 4s done every single week. And why is 85% matter? Because 15% failure rate's kind of the optimum for learning and development. If you're never failing, you don't learn. If you're failing all the time, right? It's a drudge. It's a morale issue. So 85% or a 15% failure rate is what I target. And so, if we're hitting, all the 5s, 85% of the time we're getting the 4s done, and we're getting the meetings done early, we get 10s all the time, and you just look forward to those meetings.
That's interesting because we hold back on the 10s because I think we're still waiting for like this, because we do the same thing, the maximum, like that was the greatest meeting ever. But I'm going to reframe that with our team that these meetings should be 10s. Like we'll see people give 9s, and we've even had a 9.1 or something like that. But that's helpful. And, when you're talking about both sitting as a founder and then, as an investor, you've said, small and medium-sized businesses are the lifeblood basically of a free society, which when I hear that makes me think it's more than just about the money. Then if you're talking about the lifeblood of a free society, talk about what you meant about that.
Do we have hours?
No, this will be where Kim will come in and say, hey, narrow it down, but maybe talk about the importance of these small and medium-sized businesses that you work with and cater to.
Well, there was a part of the question that really said, do we have hours, right? So I deeply believe that small and mid-sized businesses are the lifeblood of a healthy society. And why? It's because they're constantly pushing the leading edge of the, sort of improving society, right? Improving the way we work, improving, our lives, improving the products, just like that's what evolution's all about, right? It's advancing useful information and helping us just get better and better and better. And in particular, the human side of all this versus the AI side, right, is always pushing the leading edge to make us better. And so you need these businesses in order to push us and in order to challenge, the status quo, in order to attack the businesses that get so big that they can afford to pay for the lobbyists and everything like that, and they've gotten so big that they become institutions, but they become institutions that are now more about protecting themselves than doing the work that's required to sort of take us to the next level. And so, I think that healthy societies are those societies that are just create the least amount of friction with regard to the advancement of, the way the world works.
No, and that is correct. And it's these small and medium-sized businesses that look at the larger ones and say, okay, your profit margin and your lack of focus now is my opportunity. Like we can do this better and faster. And when you think about, so much of, whether it be the book Traction and just the EOS system is about strategy and growth and operational, but you spend as much time, because I get your emails that come and then you can have all the hyperlinks to click on, which have been great. But really the organizational environment is just as important as the really that strategy. Talk about why that environment, that organic environment that you talked about when you first started, just walking into an office and you can feel the energy and different pieces. But talk more about the organizational or organic environment that's happening.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's Peter Drucker's old saying, right, which is attributed to him, but no one can seem to find the source of it, right? But culture eats strategy for breakfast or for lunch or whatever it is, right?
Yep.
Organizations are all about people coming together, about sort of a diverse perspective in terms of how to tackle something, how to create enduring value, and that enduring value is a brand, it's the organization, it's the company itself. And, I like to say that if you think about what it takes to create something of enduring value, it takes thinkers, feelers, doers, and guardians. And the thinkers are the people that come up with the ideas, but ideas by themselves are worthless, right? And so then, the feelers are the ones who are like, hey, does this really make sense? Are people going to buy into this? Is this going to scale, right? Is it going to get traction? Pun intended.
Yep.
And then someone's got to do the work, and then right. And so those are the doers, and then finally the guardians. Those are the people that are like, hey, by the way, all this is great, guys, but let's not forget about what it is, who it is we are, what it is we do, how we bring value to the world. And I like to refer to Chesterton's fence, right, which is you don't knock down a fence until you figure out why the heck it was put up in the first place. And if it's been around for tens or hundreds of years, there's a reason it's there. And so don't go break stuff and destroy stuff without understanding what the consequences are. And the thing that I like about that model way of thinking is, I think it's quite sad to think about these companies that hit $1 billion and have like one person, because to me, we were just talking about it a bit earlier, right? I mean, I love working with my team. I love working with younger people. I just, they continue to push me, and sometimes they push me in ways that are uncomfortable, but that I need to be pushed. And so, the idea of a single person company, I think it's kind of sad, right? I think, what you want to do is, you want to make the world a better place, and you want to enjoy the journey associated with the work you do.
No, and you want to share it along the way, with someone. If you're just celebrating by yourself, that isn't that great. And I hope everyone, marks a like or share at that point where Mark said thinkers, feelers, doers, and guardians. That's a great thing to come back to get more information and rehear, that part again. And when I think of, the company, so those are the 4 different groups, but also are you finding with the small and medium-sized business that there's this really kind of unavoidable stages of development and these changes that the leader is going through? What do you see with the leader and just the emotional development as well as just being a better leader that they got to go through? Maybe talk about those unavoidable stages that you mentioned on a podcast previously.
Yeah. So, once again, with 44 plus years of pattern recognition experience or experiences that lead to pattern recognition, what I've come to believe is that there are 5 unavoidable stages associated with developing an enduring business, something that you can pass on to the next generation, whether it's a generation of owners or a generation of leaders. And each of those stages of development has a very specific set of competencies that you need to develop. And those competencies aren't just, they're not just the obvious things like, okay, you need to learn about sales and marketing and operations and things like that, right? But they also include levels of leadership. Right. While the levels of leadership and the stages of development don't go hand in hand, and I'll explain that in a second, they rhyme, right? And so the stages, first stage is product market fit, pretty obvious, and the second stage is actually showing that you can repeat the activities that generate cash flow, because every single business has employees. The employees that require expense, they salary, et cetera. So you got to figure out how to bring in cash, and you can do it through one of two things. You can raise additional capital, like OpenAI did for years and years and years, because people bought into what they were building. Or the more obvious thing is you're generating revenues by selling a product and servicing your customers and getting them to buy it again, right? So that's stage 2. Stage 3 is now, okay, so we've proven that we can generate cash flow, almost always revenue. And now we need to figure out how to divide and conquer and really start to create core functions, a marketing function, a sales function, an operations function, finance function, et cetera, right? So that's stage 3. Then stage 4 is getting from stage 3 to stage 4 is the hardest. That's what EOS is all about, right? Really helping businesses master stage 3 and position themselves for stage 4, if not, get really good at stage 4. But the reality is as you're building a company, especially if you're a first or a second time founder, there's a bunch of stuff you just don't understand because you've never been there, right? You don't know what you don't know. And so you go out, and I've done this myself, right? You go out and you hire some people that are experts at marketing, as an example, or sales or operations or engineering or whatever it is. And you bring them onto this thing called a leadership team. And next thing you do, you turn around and you've got like these 5 or 6 different people, and you're all like not talking from the same, you're singing from the same hymnal, right?
Hymnal, yeah.
Yeah, and everybody's bringing their own playbooks. They're bringing their own culture, right? They're bringing their own tools. So now you've got, I call it tool anarchy. So one team's running on ClickUp, one team's running on Monday, another team's running on Asana or Jira, and everybody's got their own way of doing these things. And now you've got to step up. If you're the founder and or CEO, you got to step up and bring this team together and get everybody on the same page. And it's not just, and it's a bunch of different stuff. It's core values, it's systems, it's language, it's your performance standards. It's, maybe you're more sophisticated and you want everybody to sort of have a shared set of, small set of guiding principles. It's how often do you have conversations with people around how well they're doing? And obviously you get into career development, all this kind of stuff. And you've got this, this collection of people that aren't on the same page at all, right? And so, what EOS is about is really trying to help everybody get on the same page. Who are you? Where are you going? What's your ICP? What's your compelling value proposition? What kind of pace are you going to collectively take? Is this a 9-to-5 organization, or are we doing something that's highly ambiguous and fast-paced? And so we're kind of like, this is like almost a 9-9-6 culture, right? You're working from 9 to 9 every single day, 6 days a week.
Yep.
So there's just a lot that goes into mastering stages 3 and stage 4. But stage 3 is basically, building out the system. Stage 4 is integrating, getting everybody to work really, really well together. And then stage 5 is getting it to the place where you can confidently and competently pass it off to the next generation. And the reality is the level of leadership that you need at each of those stages is different, right? And what I said earlier was that stages and leadership they rhyme, but they're not exactly the same. So you can have a really small stage 5 company, and you can have sort of what I would say is a very competitive oriented leadership team, right? But with, let's just say, 30 people. Now imagine we've got a company with 200 or 300 people, right? Now all of a sudden you really need what I'll call it sort of a stage, level 5, level 6 leadership. And what that means is we're not just all being competitive, right? We've got some people that are developing their own leadership capabilities. And some people are competitive, and that's how they're really focusing and thinking. Other people are more about empathy, right? I really want to surround myself with and take care of all my people. And that's good. That's a stage of ego development, but it's insufficient if you got a 300-person company, because ultimately, right, we need to be both high care and high performance. And if you over-index on care versus performance, right, in your organization and all these other parts of the organization are doing much better, you start to get this tension, right, which is, hey, man, we're running 80 miles per hour, we're getting all this work done, right, and you're running 60 miles per hour, and you got a bunch of people that are really nice, but we're constantly waiting for them to do their work, and their work's not great all the time. And so the reality is the nature of leadership changes on the ones and threes, right? 10 people, 30 people, 100 people, 300 people, and as I said earlier, as goes the leadership team, so goes the whole corporation. But as goes the leader of the leaders, so goes the leadership team. And leader of leaders can end up sort of being held back because they're constantly working on the developmental needs of their own people, and that means that they can't actually work on themselves.
Do leaders like that then, and maybe even some of your own shortfalls or failings with other companies that you've been a part of, because you mentioned the 44 years, and for a lot of people, they might not have 44 years or multiple chances, right, to do this. And I was just thinking, as you think of that development, do some leaders just eventually tap out, or they never realize what they don't know, and that company just never succeeds to where it needs to get to? Does that make sense?
1,000%, right?
Okay.
95% of the businesses, right, as you know, go out of business, right? And then I would submit to you, of that 5% that don't go out of business, the vast, vast majority of them get stuck at around 10 million in revenue. And that's because of what you're talking to, right? The leader of the leaders, maybe they get stuck at sort of, I'll call it, sort of ego development level 5, which is, they're very good at being competitive, but they haven't developed, the ability to work really well with other people. It's, and so they're grinding through people, and the business just never breaks through the 10 million ceiling. And so, 95% go out, and then probably 95% of the 5% get stuck at under 10 million in revenue. And it's because of leadership. Yeah,
that's hopefully, or what I was thinking, and where I'm going to come back and listen to this, that tension part you mentioned is real. If you've created a culture of high performers or expectations, whether it's the 996 or no, we're going to get things done, et cetera, because I've noticed that even with our firm, where our efficiency and what we get done tends to be, when we look at the comparables in the wealth management business, we just do more, we get more, there's more efficient, and whenever someone doesn't match that standard of excellence, and it doesn't happen very often, but even, we make errors on the hiring, and we feel that tension, and the other team members are telling us about that tension of, hey, this isn't working, or why is this person doing this when we need to get going? So I think tension is a real thing. And then you talked about overcorrecting, like on the, I don't know if it was empathy index or whatever index you said, but you can be too kind and not hold people accountable, which I would argue isn't really being kind to them then too. But you've seen it where, they put people too far in front without the accountability. And that's another place where you're just going to get stuck then, I would imagine, at that $10 million number.
100%. Yeah. And it's, I've said this for decades, that the easier cultures to manage are I used to call them, and it's probably too pejorative, right? But country clubs versus warriors, right? So country clubs are where, relationships are really, really, really important, right? And everybody's doing their best to have great relationships. And so there's a tolerance right? Probably an unacceptable level in some regards. But maybe it depends on the industry. It may be fine, right? But it's really, relationships is job number one within the organization, within the culture. Then you got warrior cultures, right, where it's performance is everything, right, and everybody gets judged on it, and there's a lot of it's a hard environment to be in for a lot of people, because you either perform, right, or you don't move on, or you move on. And in one of my career stories, and I won't bore you with it, was that I took over a multi-billion-dollar business where we lent to and invested in companies being acquired by private equity firms, and we were struggling, and we were struggling for some of the reasons we're talking about. And so I said to the president at the time, we need to have an up or out culture, and she really struggled with that. And so, long story short, we brought in a person to help us think some stuff through, and she ended up resigning, and I ended up becoming the president. And I immediately put in place an up or out culture, and it was broadly, welcomed by the whole organization, much to people's surprise, right? But it was actually very easy to build that culture. In my own company, we do not have an up and out culture, and that's and so that's harder, right? Because we got to balance high care and high performance. And I have had leaders over the years that over-index on care, and so and now these days I have very open and honest conversations with them, because, as you pointed out, it's really not kind. Right? Yep. Because now all of a sudden, either the people below them are not getting the proper kind of guidance they need in order to succeed here, or they're the issue. But you've got an issue, and you need to help people understand that this isn't working for us, because we have to, in order for us to be successful, especially right now with everything going on in the software world. We have to be really good at doing both high care and high performance. We don't have a choice. The marketplace has imposed that upon us.
No, it has, and it's almost, when you were talking about the warrior part, there are certain ethos in that warrior community where the relationships are tremendously deep, but also high performing, because there's consequences. And you were, when you talked about just your company today, you had talked not that long ago about where the culture, though, at 90 went some places that you weren't really comfortable with, or you didn't feel good about it. So how does maybe Ash should be vulnerable here, but How does a leader like you, what were you missing along the way? Like, how did that happen when you know so much about it? And then how did you end up correcting it?
Yeah, well, how it happened was that we grew very fast. And I interviewed every single person we hired up until 2022. And then I, in my opinion, mistakenly stopped doing that. And I really sort of put myself into a position where my job was to make sure that the people that my direct reports wanted to hire, that they joined us. So not to brag, right? But we landed 96, 98% of all of our offers, right? I was really good at bringing people on board.
Yep.
But what I was no longer doing was I was no longer vetting people. And what happened was I think we ended up under-indexing on a couple of core values that were extraordinarily important for us. And those were inquisitiveness and resilience, right? And so when things got tougher, and we had to sort of make hard decisions and move faster, there was a part of the organization that was uncomfortable with that. right? And as I said earlier, I think we, ended up having some leaders around me, and I had conversations with them, and we can go get into the details here, right? Where it was like you're over-indexing on care versus performance, number one. As a part of that, you really care more about your team than you do the company, and that doesn't work, right? Because the company is what carries us, right?
Yeah.
And so you're over-indexing on your team, you're over-indexing on what's important for you guys versus the company. And one of the classic examples I'll give is that, everybody knew that we had a lot of work to be done. And yet we ended up having some people that ended up admitting to me when I was letting them go that they were not really working that hard, that they didn't have that much to do. And I'm like, and they're like, I probably should have told you, right? I'm like, yeah, you probably should have told me, right? And so, we ended up, like I said, we over-indexed on care. And certain leaders over-indexed on, what was best for their team as opposed to what was best for the company. And I knew it was happening. Right. And I tried to lean in and explain this to the leaders and leverage my head of people to make sure that this isn't happening. And so we did some stuff. It didn't really work. Right. And ultimately, we ended up having to let a bunch of people go, which is really, 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 really bad, especially if you're like we are, and we're teaching people how to become, really, really good at building, extraordinarily productive, humane, and resilient organizations. And we ended up being the cobbler's, children with no shoes.
Well, I appreciate you, sharing that because, that's a tough analogy where, okay, how's this going to be perceived when people see, these layoffs and different pieces? But I'm hoping the listeners, if you like that component about the over-indexing, to make sure just, liking and sharing, because that is something you can come back to. That to me is great language when you're meeting with those leaders, because it isn't saying it is getting your point across, but it is direct. But hey, you're over-indexing right now on the people side, and the company side is being underemphasized. But it could also be on the flip side, hey, you're overemphasizing the company and the warrior mentality, and you're going to drive your team, to leave because that isn't what was stated to them, when they were signed up into. So I like how you talked about that over-indexing, because it's a pretty easy measurable of saying, hey, we just got to bring it back this way more. Let's focus on this the next quarter.
And the balancing is hard, right? Because you'll never get it perfect, right? You're always kind of a little, as opposed to, it's really easy to just lean into either end, right? But the balancing is hard. And the thing that I think I've gotten better at doing, back to sort of levels of leadership and levels of ego, we all go through these stages of ego development, right? You cannot get from stage 3 without going through stage 2. And, and stage 4 of ego development, I like Lovinger's model, but I've kind of created my own version of it, but is belonging, right? We need to, we all want to be a part of something. We learn by belonging, right? We learn by watching other people. But if we get stuck at belonging, then, we're constantly just sort of parroting whatever our tribe says. And so at some point you're like, hey, I don't believe everything my tribe says. And so I want to develop some individual agency, and I want to have some personal success. And that's the next stage. It's achievement, right? And then what happens in the achievement stage is, and I'm guilty of it, right, is in order to win, in order to be successful, maybe you did some things that you could have done better in terms of empathy, and maybe you stepped on some toes, or you rough elbowed someone in order to get what you want done. And so then you're like, okay, so now I need to be better at really appreciating other people and sort of develop that empathy skill. And so that's a part of development, right? But then at some point, right, you're like, you know what? I can't be overly empathetic because now I'm actually, I'm being nice, not being kind, right? I'm over indexing on care versus performance, and I'm hurting the team, I'm hurting the organization. And so you have to push through empathy and get to that next stage, which is where you say, hey, we can't all get along, so I'm going to align with those people who really are aligned with me in terms of where I want to go and the speed that I want to go at, and the level of ambiguity that we're comfortable with. And so you move to that level 7 of ego, which is alignment. And then level 8 is now you're not just focusing internally, but you're thinking about the whole system and your customers and your investors, and right. And then level 9 is, you're extraordinarily wise. And by the way, very few people get to level 9. But as what you really want to get to, especially if you've got a larger organization, is you want to get to level 8, and you want to surround yourself with level 7s or people that you think can at least get to level 7 in terms of their ego. And so, but that's that's really important when we're talking about 100 or 300 employees or more, right? It's not as important when you got 10 or 30 people because you're capable of basically seeing and doing everything.
No, that's true. And did you find that your thinking really has evolved as you've been affiliated with larger companies as well too? Because you did have to see, that the 3, one person company, 3 to 30 to 100 to 1,000 employees. What did you miss along the way, or what were some of the errors and different things that were happening as you were getting more affiliated with larger companies where you had more delegation, more leaders you were trying to develop? Because you're right, if it's 1 or 3, you can get most of that stuff done on your own then.
Yeah, I think, it's not just that, I've invested in over 100 companies. So I've sat on, over 30 boards. I've coached now, the leadership teams of hundreds of companies. And if you look at, being, an investor, a board member, and literally a coach, right? And then, back to one of our core values, being inquisitive. I'm constantly, listening to podcasts like yours and others, and studying, other people who've been through the journey. If you study things like Brian Chesky and his whole founder mode sort of story, there's a lot of learnings that I get to gather from very successful, very well-known people, because we live in this age now where we have these amazing podcasts, and if you really want to become the student of something like leadership, if you want to become the student of something like the stages of development, God knows there's gobs and gobs of information that you can go and gather. And I could go on and on this topic, but it's a combination of both the direct work and study.
But that is good news for those that are listening. That, nothing can really replace real life of going through and having to make your own payroll, or as you get larger, having to make big decisions on acquisitions or different pieces, or when you talk about, laying people off, that is hard, but you can gather a lot of information prior to that. And you mentioned the one podcast on founders. You also think there's a big difference between entrepreneurs and founders, and what is the not purpose of each of them, but talk a little bit about the difference between founders and entrepreneurs.
Yeah. So this is another one of my, sort of strong beliefs. I think that we do a disservice to both when we use when we try to smash those two words together. So, a founder is someone who's deeply dedicated to building something that will survive them, right? Once again, can be they'll build at least a stage 5, if not 6 or 7 company that can be passed on to the next generation of leaders and or owners. Whereas, an entrepreneur can be a balloon salesperson, right? They go buy balloons at the local, Walmart and then go down on the corner and sell them.
Yep.
Right. And so, I say there are 5 types of entrepreneurs. There are the visionaries like the Elons of the world, Bezos. We can go on. But those are pretty obvious, right? And then you have what I call the disruptors, which are the likes of like a Sam Walton, right? So they're basically disrupting an industry that already exists, as opposed to the visionaries are creating a new industry. And then the vast majority of entrepreneurs are actually, I used to call them lifestyle, but I think it's better to refer to them as craftspeople, right? So they genuinely, they don't want to work for someone. They've got enough drive and enough intelligence and enough sort of conscientiousness to strap on and build a business. But, they're building it for themselves more than they're trying to build something that they can pass on to the next generation. And maybe they sell it, maybe they don't, right? I think it's sad that if and I want them to become founders, right? And then the next group of people are accidentals, right? And they just ended up owning a business. Maybe it didn't make it through high school, as an example. And next thing you know, you've got a car washing business with 6 different cars running around in your local town. And then finally, they're the opportunists. And those are people that just, frankly, all they want to do is make a buck, right? And so they're not trying to be a founder, and they're not trying to build, a great company, because building a great company is really hard, as we're kind of talking about, right? And so, it's useful to understand who you are, right, in order to, become really good at what you want to get. And the reality is, I would love for all 5 of them to become founders, all 5 types. The first 2 almost always are innately wanting to be founders. And then, part of my mission is to help the other 3, see the light, because ultimately, to me, you've done all this work. Let's just do a little bit more work so that we can pass this on to the next generation.
No, and I really love that. And I think about, when you say this next generation, you had mentioned we're living through one of the most extraordinary transitions in history of work, and what's coming. And what do you think leaders are underestimating, right now about the future of organizations, and what maybe did you even underestimate 2 to 3 years ago that you're seeing now?
Yeah. So one of the things that you can tell I love frameworks and heuristics, right? And so I've actually come to the conclusion that founders actually don't get as much say on culture as they think they do. And that if you think about it, the nature of the marketplace that you're playing in is going to have a large impact on the culture. And if you think about culture, and we study culture for the last 300 plus, 1,000 years in humans, right? They started off with being relationship based, small, right? Just getting along. Then over time, humans started to live in tougher environments where they needed to end, where they could build larger tribes. And so those cultures became what I call agreements-based cultures, right? We all have to agree we're going to save, we're going to do all this work, we're going to divide and conquer so that we can be prepared for winter. And it includes not just going and getting the food, not just prepping the food, but storing the food, right? And then protecting the food that's being stored. And then it's not just protecting from the elements, it's protecting from the tribe, that didn't do the work that you've done. And then the tribe that that you're worried about, they got bigger, so you got to get bigger. And so all of a sudden you need these agreements, whether they're rules and et cetera. And so they just became, slightly more sophisticated cultures. I believe that we're actually transitioning into the next phase of culture, which I call principles-based cultures. And you need these principles in order to navigate speed and ambiguity at the same time, right? Because you can't, things are going too fast for you to have a bunch of playbooks and a bunch of rules and systems, right? And to teach it. And so you need more than just core values, you need principles. And if you think about it, what drives the cultures is levels of pace and levels of ambiguity. So, and then its question is, what kind of pace are you going to need in order to survive? What level of ambiguity exists within the industry? And that gives you kind of a 9 box. And far right is sort of what I'll call 996 paces, a lot of ambiguity. Right, the frontier models, obviously, for years, and you just need really driven, really sharp, really principle based
team
members in order to not go crazy trying to win that game. So the reality is that whether you like it or not, a lot of industries are actually having a shift in terms of what the culture, right? To make what the cultural requirements are in order to win. We in 90 have dealt with that, right? We've had to shift up into the right in terms of pace and ambiguity. And the reality is that not every person joined the company wanting to run at that pace and wanting to deal with that level of ambiguity. And so I personally believe that I designed the culture to be able to thrive with an increase in pace and ambiguity. But I'd be lying to myself if I said that's genuinely true. The reality is that, as I said earlier, we under-indexed on inquisitiveness and resiliency for several years, and I really want to take care of all of our people, and so we're grinding our way through sort of upgrading the culture, and upgrading is the wrong term, in terms of modifying the culture, and it's hard. It's hard work because, we have great people, right? Culturally speaking, in terms of just good humans you like working with, 99% of the people we've ever hired are really, really, really just exceptional human beings, but they're not all fit for the nature of the game we're playing.
What's an example of someone being inquisitive, or how you would measure that? Because you've mentioned that a couple of times, as that's one of your core values, and then we'll come back to this ambiguity and nimble. But I'm just curious on the inquisitive.
Yeah, why are we doing something the way we do it, right? One of our core values is GSSD, and the big idea behind GSSD is get smart stuff done. It's like, think about the second and the third and the fourth order impact of the decision you're making, right? Why are we doing the thing that we're doing? Why do we care about aesthetics, as an example, right? Why do we care about why do we care about making sure that every single person is doing a decent job in terms of generating a meaningful level of value against their cost, right? Why do I talk about culture as much as I do, right? If you don't understand something, ask, right? One of the things, back to my investing days, the founders and CEOs that I found most attractive were the ones who admitted they didn't have all the answers, right? But they asked great questions.
No, that's interesting. I was thinking even our young people, because this came up in our development training, we're really known as a great training and development firm for these tremendous young people on our team. But that was one of the things that came up, of that when we're building out these comprehensive plans, that they're putting the plans together, but maybe not enough of the questions of, well, why are we doing it this way? Or why this strategy versus this strategy? So they're producing the work, but it is pulling out that inquisitiveness about them to say, but now the next, I think you said the second or third level of thinking, or second or third level of impact of, now, how is that impacting the rest of the plan because you input this here? So I just really love that component of it. And with the change and things you're doing, this Gina, as I mentioned before, our CO, has been using 90, and she wrote a testimonial for you. I'm not sure if you knew this or not, but about your new Ask Maz. She said, Ask Maz was honestly life-changing for me. I used to rethink a future state accountability chart for a team whose scope of responsibility now requires additional resources. And in one day, it helped me break a consolidated structure into clear, more specialized seats to find the accountabilities, gaps, just going on and on. And she just said what would have taken me months of meetings and iterations, I was able to do it on my own for in one day. And what I think, to me, what that meant was, instead of her having this big rock that was going to take a month to get done, utilizing the technology that now, and this would be whatever technology you're using, but just something new that you have added recently, that it allowed her to get 95% of the way there. She still had to do the input. She still had to think, but now she has something to present to the leadership team and get additional input. So she's never going to be replaced by AI. She's just saying it's like her having that junior analyst sitting side by side with her to take her thoughts and ideas and exponentially increase, that rock. So it became a level 5 rock that could get done between one Monday meeting when we'd meet to the next Monday meeting versus, hey, let's move that to, 60 days out while Gina puts that together. So I wanted to tell you that she wrote that, and it was just great to read about the efficiencies that you guys are adding now to your programs too.
Yeah. It's back to, what makes us, AI is never going to replace, sort of the role of humans in terms of advancing, the way we do things and the way we make life better on this planet. AI has no stake. We have a stake, right? And I even think that, I've done a lot of work thinking about this in, 50 or 100 years from now, how's it going to look? But, the humans are on the leading edge of what's next, because we've got these stakes that we're solving for. Cancer, right? Improving the percentage of the world that genuinely feels like it's thriving, and 90% of the time, right, it loves doing the work it's doing. Improving the way we respond as opposed to react to things. Helping us understand that, we're exactly in the moment we're supposed to be learning the lessons we need to learn. And there's just, it's so funny because, we have these huge amounts of problems, right? There's no lack of problems to be solved. Right?
Exactly.
It's an infinite array, and it's gonna be that forever. We're always gonna have opportunities to make life better, faster, more fulfilling, et cetera. And so, Ask Maz, our AI companion, it's there to help you see that exists, right? It enables you to compress the effort associated with comprehending what's going on in the business so that you can do the real work, which is, taking the organization to the next level, leading from the edge of where you are to where you want to go.
That is awesome. And the last question, maybe this one, because it's going to be so profound, maybe this will end up on our Leadership with Ed website. So if you want the answer to this last one, maybe this is where it'll show up. But I thought this was just kind of a great question someone had told me to ask you. They said, after decades of studying organizations, leadership teams, and founders, what do you believe the best leaders understand about people that average leaders still miss? So best leaders understand about people that average leaders still miss.
We're all extraordinarily unique, and we're all, on our own unique journey, right? We all want to matter, and what the hardest part of leadership is, back to nice versus kind, it's to helping people figure out whether they can thrive, right, within your organization, or whether or not, for whatever reason, who you are and what you are and where you're going and the pace associated with the work you're doing doesn't quite match up with them. And then if that's the case, to do everything you can to help those people move on in such a manner that years later they'll look back and say, you know, that was an amazing experience. I grew from it. It may not have been the outcome I wanted, but it was the outcome I needed.
Ooh, I actually love that, and that exiting with grace and showing them that you still care. It just wasn't the right fit for how we operate. It's not right or wrong.
Right.
It's just not the right fit, and you're going to be happier somewhere anyway. And now let me help you get to that next spot, and do it with dignity and grace. So, wow, that was a great way to end. That's all we have for now. This has been a great episode with Mark. And if you like what you're hearing today, make sure you're liking, subscribing, and sharing. But Mark, you've impacted so many. You said, I wasn't going to give away, but the 44 years that you've been investing and leading and growing businesses, and now the work that you're doing at 90 IO has just been incredible. And so I just wanted to thank you for being on Leadership with Ed. So many positive, great things people can take away. So thank you, my friend. I appreciate you.
No, this is an awesome conversation. Thank you, Ed. Appreciate it.
You are welcome. This is Ed McGill, co-founder and partner at McGill Jungie Wealth Management, but just as important, host of Leadership with Ed, a 301 level leadership podcast. And thanks everyone for listening today. Appreciate it.